I'm really actually pleased to be speaking last, surprisingly. I know it's the graveyard shift, but a lot of the messages I want to share with you today have been mentioned already. So actually, my speech is done, and I won't go quite yet. But a lot of those messages have already been reiterated, and I hope to strengthen those with a view from the lead contractor's perspective. But before I get started, a little bit of audience interaction here, so prepare yourself. I'm going to ask you a question. I'm going to show you 3 slides up here, and I'd ask you to just shout out when I've got through the 3, not before, when I've got through the 3, what you think these organisations have in common. So you have Nokia, Kodak, and General Motors. So come on then, what do we think the 3 have in common? We've got a couple of hands. Go on, shout. They've all been through the ringer, right? They're all, they want to embrace, they do definitely want to embrace new technology. Anyone else? Okay, well, let me, there's some good answers there, but let you I'll put you out of your misery. This is what I think. I think in their time, they're probably some of the most successful companies in the world. They've made a huge amount of money. But what I want to emphasize is the in their time element. I think you probably will agree with me that all 3 of them are either in or have been or are out the end of some pretty troubling times. If we look at Nokia, I think it's fair to say they almost completely missed the smartphone. If we look at Kodak, they decided to stick with film and avoid digital cameras. And if we look at GM, they got totally sideswiped by the Toyota production system and Toyota's totally new way of doing things. And this has had a major impact upon their business. And I think all 3 of them have missed the technological change in their industries. As we know, Nokia are in serious decline, Kodak don't exist anymore, and GM went bankrupt and had to rely on the US government to pull them out. So, hello, my name is Alasdair MacDonald. I am Director of Strategic Innovation for Balfour Beatty. And yes, that is me. I've not sent someone else to present today's slides. It was before beer, fine dining, and a few years of work got to me. My role is to try and understand the changing environment, the changing market within which Balfour Beatty operates, and enable the business to take advantage of that. I also am charged with developing and growing our innovation community. I've put ecosystem there, but it's a bit of a wanky word, so I won't bother using it. And I'm also there to encourage innovation within Balfour Beatty, and the development of a culture of innovation. And based on this sort of scanning of the marketplace, I think it's fair to say the majority of people who've come here today, because they probably agree with me, that BIM is our industry's smartphone, our industry's digital camera, and our industry's Toyota production system. And I would argue that if we don't take notice of that and do something about it, we may well be either not here, in serious decline, or relying on the US government to stay in business. So what am I going to talk about today? I'd like to start with looking at the innovation imperative that I see is facing us as a society, before thinking a little bit about what specifically are the problems in our industry. Then look at why I think BIM is at the heart of a revolution, what Balfour Beatty are doing to change in order to take advantage of this, and some of the lessons learnt, just to sort of summarize and to finish. So let's begin with what I think is driving that innovation imperative, not only in our industry, but in society more generally. And I think these are some fairly startling facts. It's estimated that a week's worth of the New York Times contains more information than a person was likely to come across in a lifetime in the 18th century. It's estimated that about 40 exabytes, it's a pretty big number, I'm not quite sure what it means, but it's a pretty big number, of unique new information will be generated worldwide this year. And that's more information than has been generated in the last 5,000 years. That's a fairly staggering fact. And that's looking to double every 2 years. So what does that mean? Well, if you're a student, I have some bad news. A 4-year technical degree will be outdated by its 3rd year. That's quite worrying, really. Does it mean you have to continually restart? I hope not. Otherwise, we're never likely to. Well, actually, maybe leaving university never. Well, that'd be quite good, actually. Maybe we should encourage that. The other thing is that we're capable of communicating information very much quicker. NEC and Alcatel recently tested 3rd-generation fibre optics, which carry 10 trillion bits per second down a single strand of fibre. Now, I don't know about you, but I don't actually deal in bits. So a translation of that's something like 1,900 CDs, about 150 million phone calls a second. So there's hugely fast transfers of information. And that's getting faster and faster and faster by tripling every 6 months, and is expected to do so for the next 20 years. The other thing is that we're going to more and more people. 228 million laptops and tablets shipped worldwide this year. I think I should be in the laptop and tablet business. I'm going to move out of infrastructure. These people are better equipped. It's predicted that by 2013, a supercomputer will be built that exceeds the computational power of the human brain, and that by 2049, you'll be able to buy one in the shops that exceeds the entire human species' computational power. Those are some pretty major changes, I'd argue. We're also better connected. As of 2011, I think about 800 million people were registered on Facebook. I read an article recently that said it was up to about 900 million. That means if we were to make Facebook a country, it would sit just below India and China in the list of sizes of country. That means that we have a virtual network of people that is incredibly large. And this to me is going to change our industry in a fairly significant way. And I put out a question there. You know, are we changing fast enough to deal with these facts? Certainly within the sort of lead contractor or lead infrastructure operator role, we've got some worries. We've got new competitors, people like IBM, who've spent billions on their Smarter City program. Cisco, who are helping Barcelona develop their smart city blueprint, and Siemens, who are creating a city of the future. And if we don't pay attention, we're likely to end up with a dwindling market share. Balfour Beatty could be the Nokia, Kodak, or GM if we don't pay attention. Let me just give you one final example of how much the market really is changing. There is now a city in India, Lavasa, a new city in Pune, and it is designed, built, operated, and governed by an infrastructure company. As you can imagine, building roads and building rail is slightly different to governing entire cities. But that's where my market is going. And that really is the innovation imperative that we're going to have to deal with. So is it just me? Am I some lunatic up the front trying to convince you that the world's changing quickly and you better all run and get on board? Well, I don't think it is, and to prove it, I've asked a colleague of mine, or a colleague that I work with, Professor David Gann, to give us a very short briefing on what he thinks is happening in the industry. He's a world-renowned professor of innovation. In fact, he got a CBE for his contribution. He's worked with companies such as Lang O'Rourke and Ove Arup, IBM, and many others, and is in fact working with us. Just before I start the video, I must apologise. This was initially developed for an internal audience, so there might be one or two rather shameless plugs in there.
The starting point for us today is that we're living in rather extraordinary times. Everyone knows that the crisis we've been through is part of a major shakeout now, economically. But I think we're going through something bigger than that. We're moving from an energy-intensive economy, which really fueled growth and jobs in our cities for the last 50 or 60 years, towards what people call the information age, the knowledge economy, and so on. And we've heard a lot about that, but the reality is starting to dawn on us, and that has profound implications for the construction sector. I think this is going to take some time. We know that we're not out of the economic troubles. But in fact, this shakeout is a big opportunity for firms like Balfour Beatty. And it does mean that what we do tomorrow will be different from what we are doing today or what we did before the crisis happened. And some people call these periods very disruptive. Disruptive innovation happens. And the advice that I can give is to be on the front foot when faced with these sorts of disruptions. And for that reason, innovation is not a choice. It's an absolute necessity. There is no option. And Balfour Beatty knows that. Its leadership team now is on the front foot. It has its strategy coming forward. And I'm delighted to be able to give some overview of where I think that might sit, given this transition economically and socially from energy to knowledge. So perhaps the biggest implication will be what happens to our cities. We know that population growth will continue. We know that by 30 years' time, 70% of the world's population will live in cities. There will be 300 cities built in the next 20 years in China of more than 1 million people. There's a huge market opportunity there for the construction sector. But the construction sector is going to have to do things differently to meet those market opportunities. And that's where the structured approach, systematic approach to innovation is going to come in. The main issue, I think, will be how we harness the value from digital networks in physical infrastructure. So Balfour Beatty has a great heritage in producing much of our infrastructure. And these days, we're going to see a coupling or a convergence of new digital systems, not just overlaying on top of the built infrastructure, but actually entwined with it. And that means doing things differently if we're going to create value and make systems that work for people and business. And we need to understand what that looks like. So first of all, we'll see much more use of sensing and monitoring technologies, pervasive sensing we call it. And there are extraordinary developments now. Imperial College, where I work, has world leaders on millimeter scale electromechanical devices. These are sensors that operate without the need for batteries or any other power source. They power themselves from the vibration of whatever they're fitted to. And if you think about that, in years to come, we can almost imagine this as smart dust, sprinkling it around our buildings and creating computer networks that are our buildings. So the next question is, what data will we pick up and what use will we make of that will help those firms in the built environment and those owners and users to do better things and more efficient things. So it's not good enough just having more data. We have to have smart ways of interpreting it. And there are a lot of changes happening around us here with analytics, cloud computing, and so on, that will radically transform the ways in which we understand the use of our transport networks, water and electrical utilities, our hospitals, in fact, all of the built infrastructure that we're putting into place in our cities. But to really create value from that, and for Balfour Beatty to be a leader in that place, means programs of innovation where one is developing with other partners the possibility, the art of the possible. There are already good indications of that, of course, in the work that Balfour is doing with other companies. And we also see good evidence of the use of digital systems to help design and plan this infrastructure, the use of BIM, for example. And I was really struck by the modelling that's being done in Seattle when I visited Parsons Brinckerhoff's city modelling centre there, and looking at the single digital models that they've been able to create as part of the Seattle city. But we're going to have to extend that further. And of course, no company can reach out and do all of this on its own. The amount of talent that's needed is going to be enormous. And for that reason, I believe that the form of innovation that we need will be one where we're working in collaboration with other technology companies, other users, and particularly what we call tough customers, lead users. And this is an interesting concept, really, because if we can identify who the leading users are in any of our sectors and work with them, we'll learn a lot more quickly. And of course, innovation is also about learning to do new things. And working with tough customers enables us to raise the bar, to actually stretch our standards, to focus our innovation effort. So part of the collaboration agenda will be to tease out where we're going to place our efforts vis-a-vis the market and learn from the market. Now, there's another thing that's happening in innovation. There's been a major shift from what we would call the industrial economy. I mentioned the energy-intensive world. Well, if I ask you what you think of innovation, you'll probably have a mental model of some product development process, a car with a clay model. But in fact, 70% of the OECD economies are now service-based. Can you think of one great service company that has an industrial strength R&D centre? Well, we're going to start to see that happening, but maybe in a very different way from the 200 years of history of industrial innovation, because the ideas for innovation in services don't necessarily come from the lab. They come from the marketplace. And we talk about invention happening at the point of consumption. You see that with the apps that the kids are playing with in the street. And Balfour Beatty needs to have its own innovation process that does the industrial strength on its products and its new materials, removing inefficiencies in its process and its supply chain and its delivery, but it also needs to harness the modern world of service innovation, reaching out into the market, understanding what people are doing, not just with the physical asset, but with the services that it confers and delivers. And that means having teams that work in a different way, working in partnership, as I said, with the customers, but also with other service providers. There are great companies out there, engineering firms like IBM, that are now service companies. And I think my vision would be that as we move forward and as we move to smarter cities, we'll see an innovation process that really embraces the ability to converge physical and digital to provide much better services in the city, removing peak load. Peak loading is one of the bugbears of any citizen. It means congestion, sitting in your car going nowhere, burning carbon for no reason. And it also is expensive for infrastructure owners. If you have peak load in the electricity network, you have to have a spare power generator, a spare power plant sitting there idle. That's big capex. And of course, if we can understand how these cities are working better, if we get our digital networks harnessed with the physical, we can smooth out peak load and we can deliver new opportunities for people. So I'm very excited about the future. We have some troubling times to move through as we go through a disruptive ferment, really. It's not just about the financial services messing things up here. This is more than that. It's about reconfiguring our industrial base to meet the modern world in densely packed, exciting cities that Balfour Beatty will be building.
I think the most amazing thing about that was it was taken in one take. I think there's a lot of very strong messages in there. Some of the messages that we've been speaking about today, David reflects. And I hope you'll agree with me that this implies an innovation imperative upon our industry. So what I want to move on to next is a look at BIM, what I think is BIM as at the heart of this revolution, as an answer to this imperative. But just before I do, I think it'd be worth just reiterating a couple of points made earlier today. It's not just innovation that our industry is having to cope with. we have to cope with declining investment. This chart shows the last 40 years of investment in infrastructure, and it's not a particularly pretty sight. As I say, moving into computer shipping seems to be the way to go. We also heard about productivity this morning. Earl mentioned the productivity issue, and in fact I think a number of our speakers have done so. He also mentioned Disney, who are a key supplier, a key client of ours. But we need to be more productive. This chart shows the widening gap between other industries and the construction sector's productivity. And this is in the US, but unfortunately it's not just the US. This chart is a chart of Australia's GDP and the contribution of different things to it. And if we have a look at the last couple of bars there, and we focus on the blue in there, what you'll see between the 1990s and the 2000s is a quite significant reduction in the contribution of productivity to GDP. And I would suggest that this is a real concern and something that we have to address. Again, many people have mentioned it, and Earl also mentioned the difficulties with documentation. We have huge amounts of data and documentation and information in our processes in the life cycle, and we need to be better at managing this. We must have improvements in interoperability. A technical change paper written recently highlighted something like $15.8 billion that was being lost, again in the US, through a lack of interoperability. And we're also seeing a change to integration. It was great to hear about the operators this afternoon, because what we've realized is that the biggest issue for our clients is the business cost in operation. And actually, the size of the cost of design construction is fairly small. It's the business costs and the operating costs that affect those. So a move to integration is occurring, and we see that in things like the PPP models that are coming forward, the alliancing structures that we're having to be part of, and a move away from design, bid and build towards design, bid, because these are more efficient and they're more timely. So is all lost? Are we doomed? Is it the end of the road for our industry? Well, I don't think it is, actually. I think we can learn from other industries. If we look at the automotive, the manufacturing and the logistics industries, I think there's a clear lesson that can be learned. Using the digital tool set can drive a fundamental rethinking of productivity in our sector. And I believe that BIM is the answer to that. I think that the life cycle model that this shows, BIM can integrate into every part of that and help us with productivity throughout that life cycle. We've got a window of opportunity, I believe. We have a mature tool set, the processes are reasonably well understood, and the technology is affordable. The technology, in my view, is ready. So we have a window of opportunity. We have a window of opportunity to break out of silos. We have a window of opportunity to visualize and to integrate our clients and ourselves, as well as our supply chain, to create a shared picture. We have an opportunity to remove the waste and to try and prevent some of the things that this picture shows. We have an opportunity to be more efficient and more productive, and to be safer by design. This is a particular interest to Balfour Beatty. Safety by design is essential, and we must take this opportunity. And finally, we've got an opportunity to optimize our solutions throughout the whole project lifecycle. And Balfour Beatty is taking this opportunity. For those of you who don't know Balfour Beatty, and there may be a few in the room, I hope not too many, we're a infrastructure asset lifecycle deliverer, end-to-end infrastructure projects, and we have about a $16 billion turnover, about 55,000 people worldwide, and our value proposition is really based on taking value from our understanding of each stage of the project lifecycle and feeding that into each other stage. If I give you a very simple example, we've learnt through our operation of hospitals that if you don't have any corners in the hospital, it's a hell of a lot cheaper to clean. And so what we've done is we've told our designers of these complex buildings that we don't want any corners. Now they've had some troubles with that, of course, but they're getting there, and that is significantly reducing the cost of operating. So for us, the real value there is the fact that the whole is much, much greater than its separate parts. So we're using BIM in a few ways, quite a few ways, but some of the most powerful ways are in terms of simulation. This gives us an opportunity to understand our client needs better, to show them what their building will look like, what their road will look like, and how it will perform, to model the costs that they will have to incur, and to show you how we can reduce them. We're also using it to create one data set. I've heard a lot today about the interface between data sets. What we're trying to get to is a single model, not a model that's passed from one part of the chain to the next, but just one model that starts at the beginning and ends at the end and is the same all the way through. And that's something we're trying to drive towards. I can't claim that we've got there, but we are trying to drive in that direction. And that will help us share knowledge. It also helps us to develop, as I said earlier, optimizing that solution so that we can build it once and build it right, and so that we can reduce the risk for our clients in operating and managing their assets. So what are the results? We are seeing a measured improvement in our productivity of around 20%. And that's very, very significant. If you consider that probably the cost of the implementation of the change is in the region of 0.2, 0.3% of the overall cost, a 20% improvement is phenomenal. It certainly makes the business case for me very much easier. So all well and good. That's what you'll say, I'm pretty sure. And I'm certain that many of you will have seen this picture before while you've been walking around sites. Son, we've been doing it this way for 30 years. If there were a better way, we would have found it by now. I've heard that before, I can promise you. So how are we getting over that? How are we getting over this big challenge? How are we making the change from the workers who are making things real on site to the people who are designing in the offices? Well, we look at innovation in Balfour Beatty in terms of its pathway, and we like to use an analogy of a chemical reaction. I'm pretty sure many of you will have seen this graph before. A couple of key elements there. You have a current state and a new state, and the difference between the two is a positive benefit. That's pretty important, otherwise not much point heading down that route. But you also have an activation energy. You've also got to put something in at the start. The other feature that we've found that I think is very important, and I think it's very important to this audience, is if you're going to create change in BIM, you need some catalysts to reduce that investment. And what we've found, of course, is that the activation energy is investment in technology and in change. And I think that's reasonably obvious. You've got to put some cash in at the start to get people to change what they're doing. But we've also found that we can reduce that amount of cash through a few key items. And I'll just pause for a minute and talk you through those items on this slide, because I think, frankly, they're some of the most important learnings we've had. Foremost, for us, the places we've been most successful is where industry has standardized the use of BIM, mandated the use of BIM. UK and US is where we've seen our greatest return. And so industry standards are fundamental, I believe, to encouraging change. In addition to that, exemplar projects. Although the business case is fantastically easy to make once you're wearing the retrospectacles, it's pretty difficult to do up front. And to overcome that, you need to identify exemplar projects, because this really proves the value. And it proves the value to those most important of people in the business, or at least they think they're the most important people in the business, the senior leadership. Once we've proved to them that it's well worth investing, their buy-in allows us to remove the barriers to change. They stop the unusual behaviours you get when you ask someone to do X and it turns out that they do Y. And the last two there are equally important. You must communicate the successes. This creates a snowball effect. This gets you past the people on the ground that say, I've done it for 30 years, I know what I'm doing, leave me alone. And for us, the piece that's helped us to reduce the risk, the major reduction in the risk of this is having a strong partner. And in our case, that's been Autodesk. So let me just go into a little bit of detail on a couple of those. What we've done is we've identified exemplar projects. I mentioned that earlier. And we've invested in those. So even where the client is not interested in BIM, we've actually put our own money in to produce models. And in addition to that, we've provided training and development, tools, the right tools and the right equipment, and coaching and support. And that's allowed us to capture in these exemplar projects the benefits that can be achieved through BIM. But it's more than that. It's actually allowed us to capture the approach. How do you implement BIM on a project scale? How do you do it? What's the culture you need? What are the processes you need and the structures? And that's really helped with our rollout. We've also done this across the life cycle. I would love to say that we are completely integrated, that every part of our organisation speaks daily to every other part, but unfortunately that's just not true. So it's important to make sure you find projects that are real to every part of the business that you're working in, whether that be at the delivery stage or indeed at the O&M stage. We've also looked at the bidding side of things. And once again here you'll see two options, the BIM compliant bid, we like those, we go for those lots, but we've also gone for the non-BIM compliant bids because we believe by investing up front we're likely to build a better pipeline of work following on, that clients will see the value of BIM even when they haven't mandated it and will ask for future projects to include it. And that's what we see as a USP for us, a unique selling point. And we've also ensured that every level of the organisation is engaged, setting up steering groups at the group level with senior leadership aware regularly of what's going on and the successes we've had in the BIM space. Globally, we've set up what we've called practice area networks, centres of excellence, where quarterly meetings between leaders in the space come, and also throughout of our divisions, to ensure that we have local leaders who are pushing the BIM message, who are fighting the cause. What I'll do now, you've heard a lot of theory there, all sounds very good. So what I'll try and do now is convince you with an example. And I'll move through this reasonably quickly. I realise we're getting towards the end of the day. Heathrow Terminal 2B, many of you probably will have heard of Heathrow Airport. It is one of the busiest, if not the busiest airport in the world. Hugely complex building site, as you can imagine. We have worked there in a live environment to deliver the Heathrow Terminal 2B. This is a $680 million project and has been an integrated delivery between Parsons Brinkhoff, our design agency, our consultancy, and the rest of the Balfour Beatty construction group. Hugely complex, as I said, about 30 plus active stakeholders, not all of those the client, who've taken part, 90 plus design briefs. And we've also, because of the time constraints, had to operate a top-down construction process. That means that we've built the building before the foundations were in place and then built the foundations underneath it. Now, you might say that sounds a little bit dangerous, but actually it's not. It's easy when you've got a BIM model. It's also the largest airside project that BAA have funded ever. With more than 13 interfacing projects and somewhere in the region of 1,600 people working on site at any one time. So as you can imagine, it's a fairly complex situation. And BIM has been used throughout this project, from the conception stage in the design all the way through to the construction and handing over. We've used 4D modelling to assist us in project tracking. And that's enabled us to have weekly updates on how the project is going, giving client confidence. We've also, and this is probably where the greatest productivity gains have come, used the models to help with time and space conflict. When you're dealing with something like 250 different supplier packages all delivering in the same space, you can imagine that the conflict issues, both in terms of constructability and in terms of design, are fairly major. But we've also brought clients and suppliers along with us for the ride. We have a shared picture, and like Mr. Cheng mentioned, a project team, if you like, that is so integrated that they know what the others are thinking. And this is very important because it builds confidence in our client and means that if there are issues that occur, they're not issues for very long. They're solved very, very quickly. We've also been able to optimize construction through sort of critical path analysis, and this is extremely important in the environment we're working on. This is a live airport. There are planes going past our site every day. In fact, hundreds and hundreds of planes going past our site every day. We cannot deliver to site out of schedule. It's just not doable. You just don't get to deliver to site. And you can imagine if you get that wrong, the delays to the construction is quite phenomenal. It's also allowed us to have a collection of data live. Our site engineers work around on site using some of the Vela software that was mentioned earlier. They take their audits, they do their reporting, all online and all live, and that links straight back into the systems. So it's not theory, it's reality. It's happening. There are projects that are doing it, and this means that we have intelligent project data. We are able to create a construction management system that at the click of a button gives you not only the information about that piece of construction, but also the documents, the quality documents that go with it. And to follow on from our colleague within the FM space, it has also allowed us to have weekly updates of our as-built models. So this model is, we don't work on a design model, we work on an as-built model. This is every week, this model is updated and changes. And we've had a good result, I think, here. We have, as this quote suggests, a very satisfied client. Not only that, the design has achieved betterment of $50 million. So that's a reduction in the cost delivery of $50 million through the use of BIM on this project. And actually the most important benefit that we've achieved, and something that we're extremely proud of, is 2 million hours without injury on this site. So the health and safety benefits have been absolutely huge. And we're applying this capability everywhere. This is Victoria Harbour in Melbourne, where we've been working, the Alaskan Way Viaduct seawall replacement in Seattle, the Tamcan project in Philippines, and indeed San Francisco Oakland Bay Bridge in California. So it's not just in the UK, it's all over the world, and it's coming here pretty soon, if not already. So watch out. So to summarise, I've taken up already too much of your time. Let me just finish with a few learnings and maybe reiterate a couple of the points I've made. We are seeing advantages in the way that we optimise our delivery. There is absolutely no doubt that BIM optimises delivery. We are also using it to align our business. We acquired Parsons Brinckerhoff in 2008. Before that, the value chain I showed you earlier today didn't exist. And as you can imagine, sticking 15,000 people into 55,000 or 40,000 then is not an easy culture change process. So BIM is one of the tools we're helping to align the business along that life cycle. And the final one, which we're actually only really coming to more recently than in the past, is the intelligence that we're able to get from our models. These are the benefits that you can't predict. I think these are the benefits that come the end of the project, you're delighted that they're still bringing you cash in. Let me give you a couple of examples of these. The ability for us to better estimate our steel needs for a project up front accurately. Means that instead of buying steel as and when we require it and being held ransom to the fluctuations in the commodity markets, we can purchase futures because we know we will have the exact amount of steel. That's real intelligence. We are able to look at the way our teams are working on site. We're able to compare how one team's productivity looks compared to another's. And then we're able to take the best practice from the teams that are working better and share it with those that maybe aren't doing as well. I think that's real intelligence. And we're able to better estimate as well. And that means that we can put a price in to win a bid that is far, far lower. And as you can imagine, the senior leadership are very pleased to hear that. And just finally, really before I close, just returning to those catalysts, because I think that these are some of the things that we found most valuable. The industry standards, they're helping us to reduce the cost of investment. The exemplar projects, they are giving us the benefits to convince people that this is worth investing in, plus they're allowing us to identify the approaches to how you implement BIM going forward across all of the projects you work on. The senior leadership buy-in, that's removing the barriers you might have in an implementation such as this, and the communication of success is reinforcing the value of change. Finally, and certainly not least, a strong partner. They're helping us to minimize the risk of technology change. After all, not too long ago, I wore a muddy boot and had a blue-collared shirt, so I don't know a lot about this technology stuff. So a strong partner is extremely important in this space as well. Those are some of the ways we've catalyzed the change, reduced the investment cost. So to finish, I very much believe that BIM is the technological change that will completely alter our industry. And if we don't want to be the Kodaks, the GMs and the Nokias, we need to take note. I'd be delighted if you'd join us in transforming our industry, because after all, if you keep doing what you've always done, you'll get what you always got. Thank you very much.